In the summer of 1985, a Brazilian footballer named Carlos Henrique Raposo walked into the offices of Gazlec Ajaccio, a second-division French club on the island of Corsica, and handed them a letter. The letter was on Flamengo letterhead. Flamengo, one of the most famous football clubs on earth. The letter described Carlos in glowing terms. Elite striker. Explosive pace. Years of top-flight experience alongside Brazil's greatest players. The club read the letter. They looked at Carlos' athletic build, confident posture, the easy charm of a man who had never in his life been nervous. They flew him to France. They signed him to a contract. There was one problem. Carlos had never played for Flamengo. He had fabricated the letter himself. He had no elite pace, no top-flight experience. And as for being a striker, Carlos Henrique Raposo could not play football, not at any level, not even close. He had just signed a professional contract with a European club, and it would not be the last time. His real name was Carlos Henrique Raposo. Born in Porto Alegre, Brazil on July 2, 1963, as a child he wanted one thing, to be a professional footballer, not because he loved the game, not because he had a gift for it. He wanted the life, the hotels, the money, the women, the cameras. He wanted to walk into rooms the way great players walked into rooms like gravity, bent slightly in their direction. There was a problem with this plan. Carlos could not play football. He had spent time in youth academies. Coaches had watched him. The verdict was consistent, the body was there, the fitness was there, but the technical ability was not. He could not control the ball, could not shoot. When a match started and 11 opponents stood between him and the goal, something fundamental was missing. Something that cannot be trained into a person past a certain age. By 16, he had been released. Most people, at that point, find a different plan. Carlos made a different decision. He decided that if he could not actually be a professional footballer, he would become one anyway. The football would simply never be involved. This was not delusion. This was a strategy. The first move was the network. Carlos understood something that most people only half understand. In football, as in most industries, reputation is a currency that moves faster than information. If the right people believe you are something, most other people will never stop to check. So Carlos went to work on the right people. Rio de Janeiro's nightclub circuit in the early 1980s was where Brazilian football lived after hours. The great players Romário, Bebeto, Renato Gaúcho, Carlos Alberto Torres, they all moved through the same spaces. Carlos moved into those spaces with them. He was charming. Genuinely, he had stories. He had presence. He had the rare ability to make whoever he was talking to feel like the most interesting person in the room. Romário was one of the most electrifying strikers Brazil had ever produced. He and Carlos had grown up in the same neighborhood. The friendship was real. And Carlos understood exactly what that friendship was worth. He began being photographed with Romário, with Bebeto, with Carlos Alberto Torres, the captain of Brazil's legendary 1970 World Cup winning team. These photographs appeared in newspapers, in football magazines. They showed Carlos Henrique Raposo surrounded by giants of the game. What the captions never mentioned was that Carlos had arranged every single one of them. When coaches asked about him, players vouched for him. Not because they knew he was talented, they weren't sure he was, but because they liked him. He was good in the dressing room. He was good for morale. And the thing about a footballer who is good for morale is that coaches want to keep him around. Carlos had found the loophole. He was in. The contract system at Brazilian clubs in that era was built for men like Carlos Henrique Raposo, though no one had ever thought to exploit it quite this way. Short-term trial contracts 3 months, sometimes 6. Physical assessments, fitness tests, training sessions in the first weeks that focused on conditioning, not technical work. Carlos was extraordinarily fit. He trained like a professional athlete because he needed to look like one. He could outrun most players in conditioning drills. He could handle the gym work. As long as football remained abstract, as long as no one asked him to do anything with the actual ball, he was convincing. And then, inevitably, a training session would end and the technical work would begin. The ball would come out. A coach would point at Carlos. This is when he pulled out the hamstring. Not a real hamstring injury. A performance. An excruciating, highly specific, medically plausible performance. He would sprint, take 3 steps, and buckle. He would stay down. Teammates would gather. Concerned faces. A trainer would come onto the pitch. Carlos had also cultivated a doctor, a real doctor with real credentials, who would examine Carlos whenever necessary and confirm, yes, the hamstring. Serious strain. Weeks of recovery needed. Minimum. Medical technology in Brazil in the 1980s did not have the imaging capability to quickly disprove a soft tissue injury. An MRI scan could catch him. An MRI scan cost money and took time to arrange. By the time anyone got serious about arranging one, Carlos's contract would be nearly up anyway. He would recover just in time for the fitness training to resume. Then the ball would come out again. Then the hamstring again. He ran this operation at Botafogo, at Fluminense, at Vasco da Gama, at Bangu, at América, 5 of Rio's major clubs. In and out. 3 months at a time. Never a match. Always a reason. The clubs never compared notes. Why would they? Players moved between clubs constantly. A man with an injury history was not suspicious. He was just unlucky. Carlos was not unlucky. Carlos was meticulous. But there was a night at Bangu when it almost ended. Bangu's main sponsor was a man named Kaiser de Andrade. Kaiser de Andrade was not a man you wanted to disappoint. He was one of the most powerful and feared figures in Rio, a crime boss who had turned his money into football patronage, the way powerful men do when they want respectability. He loved Bangu. He paid for Bangu. And he was tired of watching his investment sit on the bench. One evening, Bangu were losing. 2 goals down. Kaiser de Andrade watched from the stands as his club's season fell apart. He turned to the bench and pointed at Carlos. Put him on. The coach relayed the instruction. Carlos was told to warm up. He stood up. He walked to the touchline. He looked at the pitch. He looked at the players. He looked at the fans, thousands of them, drunk and angry in the stands, already jeering at the team's performance. Carlos made a decision. He jumped the fence. He walked directly into the crowd. He picked a fight. An actual physical altercation in front of thousands of witnesses with Bangu supporters. The referee had no choice. A player who attacks supporters receives an immediate red card. Carlos was sent off before he had taken a single step onto the pitch. He had been a substitute who received a red card without ever being substituted on. After the match, Kaiser de Andrade came to the dressing room. He was furious. He looked at Carlos. Carlos spoke first. "God took my parents from me," he said, "but he gave me a father in you. Those men insulted you. They called you names. I could not allow it. I lost control. I am sorry." Kaiser de Andrade stared at him. Then he told the club to double Carlos's contract and extend it by 6 months. Carlos Henrique Raposo had just been rewarded for getting a red card before playing a single minute. He had turned a crisis into a contract extension through the sheer force of a speech delivered in under 30 seconds. This was the moment that Carlos himself would later describe as his masterpiece. France was a different challenge entirely. A European club meant scrutiny that Brazilian football in the 1980s simply didn't have. Journalists who spoke multiple languages. coaches who had seen every kind of player, staff who would watch every training session carefully. Carlos needed the fake Flamengo letter. He needed the photographs. He needed a friend at the club, and he had one. A Brazilian player already at Ajaccio who had vouched for him in casual conversation, probably without fully understanding what he was vouching for. He arrived in France in 1985. He trained. He performed the fitness drills. He was good at the fitness drills. And then a training session came where the ball was unavoidable, and Carlos found himself in a circle drill with actual professional footballers, men who had spent their entire lives developing technique he simply did not have. It lasted approximately 15 minutes before a coach's expression changed. But 15 minutes was enough for Carlos to have already identified his exit. He had spotted a journalist. He had made a comment casual, just loud enough to be overheard about a specific amount of money a rival club was offering him. A number large enough to be interesting. The story appeared in a French newspaper within days. Brazilian star in demand. Clubs fight for Ajaccio's new signing. When the club received the inevitable call asking about Carlos's injury that week, they were already half proud of him. He stayed in France long enough to collect his salary. He never played a match. He came home with a European club on his Ursum. The Ursum now had Flamengo on it, and Ajaccio, and every club in Brazil that had ever let him train. On paper, Carlos Henrique Raposo looked like exactly what he claimed to be. There is a detail in Carlos's story that people often overlook because they are too busy laughing at the audacity of it. He used a toy mobile phone, not a real phone, a plastic prop. In the 1980s, mobile phones were status symbols, expensive, rare, the kind of object that announced your importance before you said a word. Carlos had one. It did not work. It had never worked. He would answer it in front of coaches and club directors, switching into confident English, a language he did not actually speak, to conduct elaborate fake negotiations with fictional clubs. He was not just pretending to be a footballer. He was performing the entire life of a footballer. Every accessory, every conversation, every social signal that said, "This man is in demand. This man has options. You are lucky he is here." At Fluminense, an assistant coach happened to speak fluent English. He listened to one of Carlos's calls for 30 seconds before walking away quietly and telling the manager. Carlos was gone within days. He had already collected 6 weeks of salary. He moved to the next club. In 24 years, Carlos Henrique Raposo signed contracts with more than 10 professional clubs across Brazil, Mexico, France, and the United States. The United States, he appeared on the roster of the El Paso Six Shooters, an indoor soccer team, in 1989. Indoor soccer, a different sport, almost still no appearances. He never played a competitive minute, not one, at any club, in any country, in any competition. He trained with Romário. He trained with Bebeto. He stood in dressing rooms with men who would win the World Cup. He attended their celebrations. He appeared in their photographs. He wore the shirts. He just never played. And here is the part of the story that most people don't sit with long enough. Nobody stopped him. Not the clubs. Not the league authorities. Not the coaching staffs who watched him claim the same hamstring injury at 3 different clubs across 3 different years. Not the journalists who photographed him standing next to legends without ever asking why this man had no match statistics. Not the sponsors who paid his salary. Nobody stopped him because nobody was looking. Because the systems that should have caught him, the record-keeping, the player registries, the basic due diligence that a club should perform before signing someone, either didn't exist or weren't being used. Carlos didn't hack the system. He walked through the gaps that the system had left wide open. He simply required that football do what football claimed to do, and then showed that it could not. In 2018, a documentary was made about Carlos Henrique Raposo. a proper film with interviews, archive footage, testimony from the players who knew him. It was called Kaiser, the greatest footballer never to play football. Carlos sat in front of the camera and smiled. He was not ashamed. He had never been ashamed. He explained, with the easy confidence of a man who has thought carefully about his own philosophy, that he had simply wanted a particular life. He had identified what that life required, and he had obtained it. "It's everybody else's problem," he said, "if they want me to be a footballer. Not even Jesus pleased everybody. Why would I?" He talked about the women. He said he had slept with more than 1,000. He said he was in nightclubs every night, Monday through Monday, in no condition to train in the morning, and that this had been completely fine because he was never going to train anyway. He showed women videos of Renato Gaccio scoring goals and told them it was him. It worked because they looked similar and because smartphones did not exist. And because the truth is that most people, shown a confident person with a plausible story, do not stop to verify the story. They never have. Carlos knew this. He had built an entire career on it. The documentary was warmly received. Carlos gave interviews. He was treated as a folk hero, charming, roguish, harmless, a man who had beaten a system that deserved to be beaten. The clubs he defrauded did not have that word used about them. They were not described as victims. They were described as naive, as if being conned is embarrassing, as if the shame belongs to the person who was fooled rather than the person who fooled them. Carlos was fine with that framing. Carlos had always been fine with whatever framing kept him in the room. There is one more thing about Carlos Henrique Raposo. After the football career ended, after 24 years of contracts and salaries and match-day rosters with his name on them, the life ended too. The hotels stopped. The salary stopped. The photographs with legends became old photographs. The network that had sustained him across 2 decades had its own lives to lead, and Carlos was no longer a useful connection to anyone. He became a personal trainer. He worked at a gym in Rio de Janeiro, coaching bodybuilders. He was, by all accounts, good at it. He had always been good at physical conditioning. That part had never been a lie. He still talked. He still told the stories. He still had the grin. But the story ends in a gym in Rio, not in a stadium. It ends quietly, the way con jobs always end, not in a dramatic exposure, but in the slow withdrawal of the conditions that made the con possible in the first place. Carlos Henrique Raposo wanted a footballer's life without playing football. For 24 years, he got it. Then the game moved on. The clubs got smarter. The records became digital. The checks became real. And the man who had never kicked a ball in a professional match was simply no longer needed. He had not been caught. He had been made redundant. There is a difference. And in that difference, if you look carefully, is everything you need to understand about how institutions work, and how easy it is, if you are charming enough and the system is careless enough, to live inside one without ever doing the thing it exists to do. Carlos Kaiser knew that. He always knew. I will see you in the next one.